Good morning, lovelies. Today we are going to talk about how to write queer characters, specifically in science fiction and fantasy, especially if you yourself are not queer. I guess trigger warning for saying queer in this video? Like a whole lot. I'm using it as short term for the entire LGBTQ plus community, so if that's a word that you do not like, I honestly don't know why you clicked on this video, but you have officially been warned. Also, if you didn't know, cishet is shorthand for cisgender heterosexual. Cisgender is when you identify with the gender you were assigned at birth. It basically means not trans. So, when I was born, the doctor said, it's a girl. And when I got old enough to understand what gender is, I said, yes, I am a girl. I agree with what the doctor said. That makes me cis. Heterosexual is just straight. You're attracted to the opposite gender. So cishet, cisgender, heterosexual. We got it? Good. This video is primarily designed for fantasy and science fiction authors, mostly cishets, who want to include queer characters in their stories without pissing off queer audiences. Today we are going to talk about doing your research, whether or not a character's queerness should affect the plot, how to portray their queerness in the story itself, and finding sensitivity readers. So first and foremost, do your research. There are a lot of rotten stereotypes out there about the queer community that we are not going to appreciate seeing in your book, particularly if you're trying to market your book toward us to get us to buy and read it. Bury your gays is one of the most prevalent tropes where every queer character is killed off or otherwise given a sad ending, subliminally punishing them for their queerness. There's also the queer-coded villain, one of the oldest stereotypes out there that's been around since the silver screen. This is when the villain is not overtly or even canonically gay, but they'll fall into a lot of queer stereotypes. Queer villains are fine, but you need at least one queer hero to go against them. Queer baiting is the most frustrating for me personally, as the writer will tease at this particular character being queer or those two characters getting in a same-sex relationship, and then never actually deliver. This is most common in movies and TV shows that are trying to cater to both queer audiences and queer-phobic audiences, and that just doesn't work. There are several others out there, and I'm pretty sure I did a whole video just about bad queer stereotypes, so I'll link that in the cards. Do your research, know what has been done to death, and write something else. Beyond learning what tropes to avoid, though, there's a whole rainbow of queer identities out there, beyond just gay or trans or bi. Even if you're not going to include all of those identities in your book, and you probably shouldn't, there are so many, you should at least know what every letter stands for. No, the A does not stand for ally, okay? You do not get to be a part of the marginalized community if you're not a part of that marginalized community. White allies are not considered people of color, able-bodied allies are not considered disabled, and cishet allies are not considered queer. The A is for aromantic, asexual, and agender, and we experience enough erasure, thank you very much. Look, you don't need to be an expert, but you should at least know the basics. And not just for your book, right? This is just good general knowledge to have. Reading a few books by queer authors will also help, especially in the genre you're writing. So if you're writing a paranormal mystery and you want to include some queer characters, go read paranormal mysteries by queer authors. We write what we want to read, especially when it comes to characters who share certain identities with us. Every single book that I write has at least one aromantic and or asexual character in it, even if it's not the main character, because I'm aro-ace and I want to see that representation. If you find a few bestsellers by queer authors or ones that pop up on a bunch of recommended lists, you'll also see what types of characters and stories are trending among queer audiences, and since they're the ones who are the most likely to spot your book, that is something to pay attention to. I would also recommend promoting some of your favorites among the queer books that you read to your audience, again, especially if it's in your genre. Not only are you promoting a fellow author, you're also getting more fans' attention by saying, hey, this is similar to what I'm going to be writing, so if you like this type of thing, you should follow me on all my socials. It's also just good ethical practice. If you're going to write about fictional queer people, then you should also support real queer people. Alright, now on to actually writing these characters. Should it affect your plot? When you are a member of a privileged or a majority community in society, in this case, cishet, and you want to write a major character from an oppressed or minority group, you're probably going to run into the question of, should I be the one writing this? This question usually comes up when cishet authors try writing explicitly about the queer experience. What it's like to be queer, what it's like to go up against queerphobia and homophobia, what it's like to overcome queerphobia and homophobia, that type of thing. And of course, like all things, everyone is divided. Some people say, no, you do not get to write about this at all, ever, even if it makes no sense to at least mention it in your story. Others say, yeah, totally write it, but if you make a single mistake, you're a bigot. Personally, I think yes, you should write queer characters, even in stories that have queerphobic settings, but their queerness should not be the point of the story or the center of their narrative arc. Alright, so let's say you are writing a classic fantasy adventure and your main character is gay. Do not make that the point of the story. The point of the story is watching this character learn magic and save the world while working up the courage to ask out that cute boy. You could write the magical setting to be homophobic, sure, but why not write it as accepting of queer identities? It's a fantasy world. You make the rules. And creating worlds where that type of prejudice just doesn't exist is really fun and oddly freeing. Although, that might just be because I am queer, so I find it as a nice little bit of escapism. Now, obviously, you can create different types of prejudice to pose as roadblocks for your characters. I am currently writing an epic fantasy novella series where every single major character is LGBTQ+, because fight me, and most of the world is totally fine with that. But if you're a necromancer, well, now we got a problem. The Rick Riordan approach is also growing very popular among cishet writers. That is, starting with a majority cishet cast and then working your way up. When he was first introducing publicly queer characters, 9 books into the Percy Jackson / Heroes of Olympus series, they were not POV characters. We did not get Nico's point of view until after that book, after he had largely come to terms with the fact that he's gay, but he still had a lot of narrative arc to go through, namely the self-hating son of Hades thing going on. We also never get Alex's point of view in the Magnus Chase trilogy, but we still see some of the struggles that she's had to go through, namely being kicked out of her house for being trans. It is not her whole narrative arc by any means, but it is an important part of her backstory and it's talked about. Basically, this approach lets you have a main character or a POV character who is cishet and very obviously doesn't relate to the struggles of queer people, but they still emphasize with those struggles and do their best to be an ally. And you still get a major character who's queer. This is a really good way to start writing diversity if you've never done something like this before and you're a little nervous about it. Now, there is a danger when it comes to cishet authors writing queer characters, or really any majority authors writing minority characters, and that it is very easy for them to make the queer identity the character's only identity. Even if they manage to dodge most of those harmful stereotypes, every conversation with this character will revolve around their queer identity in some way. This turns them into a two-dimensional caricature that annoys everybody. These are usually the types of characters that some cishet people will point to and say, see, this is why I don't like seeing any type of diversity in their stories. It just ruins the story and the characters all suck. The problem is not with the diversity status. The problem is with the author being so obsessed with that status that they neglect everything else. The best way to avoid this is twofold. Number one, you give them a fully fleshed out character the way you do with all your other cishet characters, obviously. So this would be giving them hobbies, families and friendships, their goals and greatest fears, pet peeves, religious beliefs, skill set, magical abilities, disabilities, things that they suck at, etc. And then two, give them a complete narrative arc, specifically one that does not revolve around a cishet character, meaning they don't just exist to be the gay best friend. Maybe they're the governor's daughter and they have some classism to work through, going from upholding the oppressive system to leading a rebel army. Maybe someone screwed them over and left them to die, so now they have a revenge plot. Or their best friend, who is also queer, may be trying to stop them because they think revenge is a bad idea. Maybe their arc revolves around learning how to be a leader as their country teeters on the edge of collapse, and they have to decide, okay, do we preserve this country? Do we try to fix it? Or do we let it collapse? Maybe you have two queer characters who are part of a major revolution to overthrow the tyrannical establishment, but one sticks to their ethics and the spirit of the revolution, while the other gets corrupted and turns into the very monster that they were trying to destroy. So you end up with this really kind of bittersweet, sort of hopeful ending because you got a fallen hero, but you also have like the other character who got over their PTSD and is going to continue to lead the rebel army. And I just realized that I read a lot of anti-classist literature, and most of them are by queer authors. That can't be a random correlation. Point being, do not get distracted by your own character's sexuality or gender identity. That's only one part of someone's personality, and that should be reflected in your book. If you're getting value from this video and you want to support the channel so I can keep creating more content like this, I have a tip jar, basically a buy me coffee, linked in the description of this video. I also have a Patreon, also linked in the description. Alright, portraying it in the story. So how do you go about actually communicating that this character is gay or non-binary or aromantic in the story without beating your readers over the head with it? Or the other way, going the J.K. Rowling route and retroactively trying to add some of that diversity after the book is a huge success. Start with the little obvious details. If a character is gay, they might have a significant other or an ex that makes it really obvious just by existing. You don't have to dedicate a whole page describing how they realized they were queer and the struggles that came with it. It's just, hi, I'm Jenny, and this is my girlfriend, Alice. Done. If a character's queerness is their gender, you can pull a Star Trek. There's this really great blink and you miss it moment where two Klingon buddies meet up after years, and one of them accidentally greets them by their death name, she corrects him with her real name, and he corrects himself. It's never mentioned again because it doesn't have to be. In certain circles here in America, where it's safe enough to do so, genderqueer people will introduce themselves with their pronouns. I have been to conventions where everyone will wear name tags and they'll have our name and our pronouns under the name. Other times the conversation will start with, hi, I'm Chris, she, her. Hi, I'm Jeannie, they, them. And then we go on and start talking about, Marvel or Percy Jackson or knitting or whatever it is that we're there about. Clothing is also a really good detail to use. So for example, trans men who have not had a mastectomy will often wear a chest binder that compresses their breasts and makes their figure look more masculine. Trans men who have had a mastectomy will have the scars across their chest. Obviously, unless you're doing a sci-fi or fantasy version where they have better gender-affirming surgery that does not leave scars. Again, in safe circles, we might wear pins or t-shirts that have our pride flags or slogans on them. I really want this tank top that reads, "Why fall in love when you could fall asleep?" because that's just perfect. In the meantime, I will stick with my rings, because asexual people wear a black ring on the right hand, and aromantic people wear a white ring on the left hand. It's supposed to be on the ring fingers, but these rings are too big for that, and it just, yeah, I don't like it. This fits. Maybe in your fantasy or sci-fi world, there's a cultural thing where people who are looking for sexual or romantic partners wear a certain type of clothing or do their hair a certain way, and the gender of their desired partner dictates the exact style that they wear. So if you're explicitly looking for a female or feminine partner, maybe you wear a pink ribbon in your hair, while if you're looking for a male or masc partner, it's a blue ribbon. And if you're looking for either or, you do both, or purple or white or whatever, and there are different patterns or colors if you want something just sexual or just romantic, or if you're looking for a queer platonic partner or whatever. This is something that you could have a lot of fun with. The other way to convey a character's queerness, and this burns my soul to say it, is to tell, don't show. I know this goes against every writer fiber in my being. It hurts me just to say it because I've always been an advocate of show, don't tell, but sometimes telling has its uses. Dialogue is a big one here. Maybe a cishet character is complaining to their friend about their ex-girlfriend, and their friend, who is a woman, says, "Oh yeah, I've had a couple of ex-girlfriends like that too. They are nuts." Boom, automatically establish that that character is queer. Dialogue is also a big one for aromantic and asexual characters. Usually we have to explain to allos, that is people who are not aromantic or asexual, that no, we don't experience romantic and or sexual attraction, so we really do not understand why you're sending that person nudes or why you're mooning after that man. I've had a couple of friends who have experienced heartbreak and rough breakups, and I cannot relate to them in any way because I am aromantic and I've never been in love like that, never mind broken up like that, so I'm just like, you want chocolate? Chocolate makes everything better. I'll go get chocolate while you cry, okay? Okay. In Citadel, my sci-fi novel that comes out next year, the aliens communicate via telepathy. When the main human character, Olivia, finally gets access to that, she meets a character who's trans, whose mind is male, quote unquote, despite initially appearing to her as female. I really couldn't show that because it's like a 2-second interaction when they first meet and then they're off to save another character who got kidnapped by some bad guys. So I had to describe or tell the reader what was up and how Olivia's newfound telepathy is allowing her to communicate and learn in different ways than what she's used to. Again, you do not have to make a big deal out of your characters being queer unless a major plot point hinges on it. And those types of stories are hit or miss. Most of the time you can treat your character being queer as like it's not a big deal, because it's not. Make it obvious, sure, but it rarely needs more than one line of dialogue to get the point across. And finally, beta readers. If you're going to write major characters from marginalized communities that you are not a part of, then you need to get as many beta readers from that community as possible before your book is published. These are called sensitivity readers, and they're valuable in a number of ways. First off, they help with accuracy. If you're trying to utilize any sort of slang or cultural practices from that community in your book, or even just reference it, then the sensitivity reader will tell you if you're doing it correctly or if you sound like an idiot. I sometimes see people in real life use outdated slang when it comes to trans people specifically. And those words and sayings aren't just inaccurate, some of them are downright insulting, thanks to language growing and evolving over time. Unless the book you're writing is set in that particular time period in the past, or the character is a bigot, or otherwise did not get the memo, you're gonna wanna make sure your language is up to date. Sensitivity readers also give suggestions or advice, even if your writing already is accurate, to better enhance your characters and story. I mean, these people are gold mines of both information and inspiration. Secondly, they're a good gauge on how well your story and its characters are going to be received by wider audiences. Obviously, no group is a monolith, and people are going to disagree over whether or not a character or story element is any good. But generally speaking, if 2 or more of these readers tell you that you have a problem specifically with your minority representation, then you have a problem and you should fix it. Ignore their advice at your own peril. Now, how do you find these people? I personally use Facebook groups. I go to all the writing and reading groups that I am already a part of, an embarrassingly big number of them, and I put out a call for beta readers and critique partners. I make it clear that it has this type of character and could definitely use some eyes and voices from that community to help out. Bonus points if I can find a bookworm or writer group that is specific to the minority character that I'm writing. So for example, I'm queer, but I'm not transgender. So if I'm writing a trans character and I end up finding a Facebook group that is for trans writers and or readers specifically, you can bet that I'm gonna ask them for help. There are a handful of Facebook groups out there that are specific to LGBTQ+ fans of sci-fi, horror, and or fantasy, and they're good places to politely post, hey, I'm cishet, I made this with that type of character, can I get some beta readers before I submit it for publication? The DMs will start rolling in shortly after. There are also groups out there that are not writer or reader specific, but are made up of minority communities as a whole for support and memes. I mean, it is the internet, and I am in several groups that are specific to aromantic and or asexual memes. They're hilarious, I love them. They're not all exclusively writers or even bookworms. In fact, I'd say most of them aren't, but they might still churn up a couple of sensitivity readers if you post there. They're also really great resources for learning about the types of issues facing these communities today, as well as what type of characters and representations they like and don't like seeing in their media. Whenever there is a controversy surrounding a minority character from a popular movie or show, these groups are often the first to talk about it, regardless of whether or not it's a movie-related group. Circling back to our first point of doing your research, this can be a really neat way to poll certain audiences. Asking people in these Facebook groups what they're sick of seeing in queer characters or what they wish they could see more of, you'll get some really great insights. A lot of beta and sensitivity readers will read your book for free. Others who are writers will take a look at your book if you also take a look at their book, and still others do it for money. Like me, I offer professional manuscript critique services, and you'll find my website in the description of this video. If you want more advice on writing queer or otherwise diverse characters, check out this playlist right here. I will see you next time. Bye, lovelies.